What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. There is an old Russian proverb that says, you cannot warm your hands on somebody else's fire. Well, Vladimir Putin is finding that out the hard way. Decades ago, when he signed Russia into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the so-called Chinese NATO, he thought he was securing a circle of loyal friends, a counterweight to the West, a club of equals who had stand by him against the corrupted democracies. But as it turns out, the fire he helped ignite was not his to control. The SCO is a stage built by China for China, and Putin's realizing that everyone at this table only cares about one thing, themselves. The same man who spent 20 years preaching about sovereignty and loyalty is now surrounded by allies waiting for the right moment to exploit his weakness. He does not believe in loyalty, so why should they believe in him then? Right question, right? After all the chest beating about multipolarity, all the propaganda about equal partnerships, Putin has ended up the sidekick in somebody else's empire. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To understand why this latest summit in Tianjin feels like a turning point, not for global peace but for global cynicism, we need to rewind and look at how Putin walled himself into this trap, step by step, under the illusion of power and unity. So, the Tianjin SCO Summit, the self-proclaimed alliance of the future. Xi Jinping's grand theater for proving that the world does not need Washington or Brussels anymore, because now there is Beijing, Moscow, and a bunch of carefully curated strongmen who all swear they are independent, including Alexander Lukashenko from Belarus. But anyways, independent from what exactly? From reason, I guess, maybe? The irony is that this was not some spontaneous gathering of minds. It was a perfectly choreographed photo op, dictators pretending to be diplomats. Xi, for example, stood there smiling like a chess master, while Vladimir Putin, visibly aged, cornered and desperate for relevance, played the obedient student role. The message? Look, Russia is not isolated. We are building a new order. Except that this new order looks suspiciously like the old one, just with different flags and slightly better smartphones. The SCO summit is not about rules, cooperation, or even peace. It's about optics. It's about showing the world that despots can now form their own value system and call it progress. Putin loves that idea because it gives him a stage, a spotlight, a place to pretend he is still one of the big players, even while Russia is bleeding thousands of soldiers a month and losing engineers, teachers, and doctors faster than it can replace them. What makes this moment dangerous is not just the absurdity of Putin being treated like an equal, it is that he genuinely believes in it. The man is knee-deep in delusion. He thinks shaking hands with Xi Jinping or chatting with Modi somehow legitimizes his war. Well, it does not. It just proves how far the global moral compass has spun out of control. Once upon a time, starting an unprovoked war made you a pariah. Now it gets you a chair next to China's emperor at a round table of alternative governance. The SCO is basically the world's most expensive group therapy session for authoritarian insecurity. You have Xi Jinping fantasizing about Taiwan, Putin still obsessed with denazifying a country that never even attacked him, and Modi politely nodding along while doing everything possible to keep both sides at arm's length. And while they talk about respecting sovereignty, let's remember, half of them have armies illegally occupying somebody else's territory. But hey, why bother with consistency when you've got matching suits and fancy declaration full of meaningless words like, multipolar and synergy? But once again, its members mostly believe in these words. Why? Let's try to answer this question in our next chapter. Putin's dream of a multipolar world has always been a scam, a shiny word he used to mask all sovereign inferiority. The idea that Russia, China and their so-called friends can balance out the West sounds nice until you realize that this balance is achieved by breaking everything that kept the world from burning for 80 years. Xi Jinping calls it Global Governance Initiative. Putin calls it Sovereign Equality. The rest of the world calls it what it is. Chaos dressed up as ideology. The so-called Cold War mentality they mock was at least based on one rational rule: do not start a direct fight that could wipe out humanity. But today's autocrats apparently don't care, they forgot lessons. They mistake recklessness for power. Back in the day, even the US and USSR, with all their hostility, still knew the lines do not cross. They understood that borders, once redrawn, unleash hell. But now, Putin wants to rewrite history in real time. He talks about historic Russian lands, as if borders are just doodles he can edit whenever he feels nostalgic. And China, while preaching about stability, quietly builds naval bases and economic traps across Asia and Africa. This illusion of multipolarity is not about balance, it's about permission. Permission for every strongman to do whatever he wants within his borders, no matter how brutal, and for the rest of the world to look away in exchange for cheap gas or discounted drones. It is the new world disorder, where everyone is too busy profiting to care about principles. And Trump's chaos only greased the wheels. His 50-day peace ultimatum to end the war in Ukraine was, as expected, just another empty stunt. One more sign to dictators that the so-called leader of the free world does not even bring a translator to negotiations. The adults left the room and the wolves smelled blood. So here we are, Putin chatting with Xi Jinping as if he is back at the grown-ups table. Except that this is not diplomacy, it's damage control. A man who has destroyed his country's economy, murdered hundreds of thousands, and plunged half of Europe into fear, is now sitting smugly in a photo line pretending to be a statesman. And make no mistake, every dictator in that room saw the same thing. Not power, but weakness dressed as defiance. Yet, this is literally the last thing Putin can do in order to stay relevant, at least in the eyes of people who can still tolerate him. He just backed himself in the corner with all the politics decisions he made and did in the last 2 decades. That's literally his last case scenario. Because once the illusion falls apart, there's nothing else left to exploit. Let's talk about Putin's final attempts to stay relevant in our next chapter. If you ever wonder why Putin still smiles while burying his country alive, it's because for him, fear equals success. That's the last case scenario we talked about in the last chapter. Because after a ruling by fear, well, there is nothing else. Not a single dictator in the past suddenly turned a good guy loved by his people and other countries. There is simply no happy ending for dictators either. Once you step down that path, your road 100% of the times ends in a dead end. Putin measures victory not by prosperity or peace, but by how terrified others are of him. And for years that kinda worked. The world flinched every time he spoke about nukes or red lines, but now fear is fading, replaced by quiet calculation. Just look at China. Beijing is not longer afraid of Russia anymore, it is exploiting it. Cheap oil, discounted gas, military tech for pennies. The whole relationship has turned to liquidation sale. India is also playing both sides, publicly neutral, privately profiting. Iran then sends drones and ammunition not out of loyalty, but because it's good business. Even North Korea, the world's most isolated state, smells opportunity in Putin's desperation. Meanwhile, back home, the Russian people pay the real price. Every day around 300 up to 1,000 die in pointless assaults that achieve nothing. The economy sinks, the hospitals are empty, the schools crumble. Yet Putin stands there, chin up, pretending it's all worth it, because he gets to chat with world leaders. It is the ultimate theater of denial. But here is the thing. Putin is not fooling anyone anymore, not even his allies. They see what he has become, a liability. The man who once sold himself as the great stabilizer has turned into the embodiment of chaos. And while he thinks hosting military parades and shaking Xi's hand restores his legitimacy, the rest of the world, even the so-called neutral powers, are already preparing for Russia without him. That is the tragedy of Putinism, because it is built on the illusion that fear guarantees respect. But fear has an expiration date. Once people stop fearing you, they start plotting against you. And that is exactly what is happening right now in this alliance. Everyone's smiling for the cameras and sharpening knives under the table at the same time. Now comes the part Putin did not plan for. Regret. Not that he will ever say it out loud, obviously, but deep down he knows he built his own trap. When he joined this Shanghai Cooperation Organization all those years ago, he imagined a fortress of loyal partners, a geopolitical insurance policy. What he got instead is a circle of predators waiting for him to bleed. The SCO is not Russia's shield anymore, never been. It is China's leash. Xi Jinping using it to pull Moscow deeper into dependency while pretending it is partnership. Every trade deal, every joint declaration, every handshake is designed to remind Putin who is really in charge. And now, as Russia weakens under sanctions and war fatigue, the balance has shifted completely. China does not need him anymore. India keeps a distance. Central Asian countries that used to obey Moscow now openly flirt with Beijing. Even Iran and Turkey treat Russia not as an ally but as a convenient pawn. Putin is surrounded by the same kind of friends he has always created for himself. Transactional, cynical, and loyal only until there is better offer. He has spent decades undermining trust, betraying allies, and mocking cooperation's weakness. Now the bill is due. The SCO is not betraying him. It is simply following his own rules, the rules of opportunism. He is realizing that the empire he tried to rebuild no longer fears him, and the world he tried to shape in his image has learned from him instead. They have learned that loyalty is for fools, power is temporary, and weakness is profit. And when Russia finally stumbles, whether under the weight of sanctions, rebellion, or exhaustion, these very same partners will be the first ones to carve up what's left. Maybe that is why Putin looks so tired these days. Not because of age or pressure, but because somewhere, deep inside, he knows the truth. He has become the victim of his own foreign policy. The man who trusted no one has ended up with no one to trust. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support our work, the links down below, for example, PayPal donations. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.